At 37, I had built a life that many would envy. Married to Mason, a man I once believed was the love of my life, I was happily settled in a world of stability and quiet luxury. Having married into a wealthy family, I felt secure, both in my marriage and in the life I had created. I worked in my family's real estate business, handling most of the administrative duties while my father, the president, took charge of the more significant strategies. As an only child, the expectations were clear: one day, I would take over the company. It was a lot of responsibility, but I was ready for it, even if the burden sometimes weighed heavy on my shoulders. Still, I didn't mind it, it was a part of me. My life, while not without its challenges, was balanced, at least, it seemed so from the outside. Mason, on the other hand, had always been the opposite of me, free-spirited and laid back. He worked for a moving company and had only completed high school. His job was demanding, physically exhausting, but he loved it. I respected his work ethic, even if our lives were worlds apart in terms of opportunities and resources. To avoid making him feel inadequate, I never spoke about my degree or my eventual role as president of the company. He wasn't interested in the details of my professional life, and I didn't want to create a divide between us, so I kept things light. Our relationship had begun when a mutual friend introduced us during college. It had started out innocently enough. Mason was interested in my friend, but she wasn't interested in him. Eventually, we started talking, and over time, we found ourselves drawn to each other. His easygoing nature balanced my more serious, meticulous approach to life, and it seemed like we were perfect for one another. We married in our late 20s after a short courtship, and despite some of the differences in our backgrounds, our marriage had been easy. Mason's parents welcomed me with open arms, which was a refreshing change from the complicated in-law dynamics I heard my friends complain about. For the most part, our life together was as blissful as one could expect. Despite his demanding work schedule, Mason always made time for us. Even after long hours at the moving company, he'd come home, grateful for the dinner I'd prepared, and we'd share those quiet moments together, talking about the day. I felt incredibly lucky to have a husband so dedicated to our marriage, even when things weren't easy for him. But after a year of marriage, something started to shift. The routine began to feel stale, and I could sense tension where there once was none. I tried to ignore it, thinking that it was just the natural ebb and flow of married life. But deep down, I knew something was off. It all came to a head one night as we were getting ready for bed. Mason brought up something unexpected: children. I had imagined that at some point, we would start thinking about it, but we hadn't really discussed it. I was content to let it happen naturally over time. But Mason was different. His voice carried a note of frustration as he asked, "Why don't we have kids yet?" His tone caught me off guard. It was unusual for him to sound irritated over something that wasn't urgent, at least to me. "It's only been a year," I said, trying to calm him. "There's no need to rush. I wanted children, of course. I just didn't think we needed to stress about it. I believed it would come in due time, as it did for so many couples." But Mason, more assertive than I had ever seen him, quoted some statistics that I wasn't familiar with. "You know, there's a 90% chance of conceiving within a year for couples not using contraception," he said matter-of-factly. The figure took me by surprise. "That's high," I muttered, trying to absorb the weight of what he was saying. "If you're worried, maybe we should both get tested," I suggested, trying to take a rational approach. If there was an issue, I wanted to address it together. I hadn't assumed there was a problem, but it felt like the logical next step. Mason's reaction was far from what I expected. His voice turned harsh, laced with something I hadn't heard from him before. "What are you implying?" he shot back. "That it's my fault? Usually, it's the woman's fault anyway." The words hit me like a slap. I hadn't blamed him. I had only suggested we find out if there were any issues so we could address them together. It was the first time he'd spoken to me this way, and I was left speechless. "It's definitely the woman's fault," he added, almost with venom, as though it were a fact that could not be disputed. I couldn't believe it. My mind raced, and I felt an overwhelming sense of confusion. I had no idea where this was coming from. But instead of answering, I simply said, Fine. You get tested. I'm too busy with work. His response cut deeper. I have a job too, you know. You're just coasting along in your dad's company. His words stung more than they should have. I worked hard in my father's company, learning the ropes, preparing to one day take the lead. I wasn't just coasting. But I knew that bringing this up would only make things worse. The conversation ended abruptly. Any attempt at further discussion was met with curt, dismissive replies. We both turned our backs to one another, the silence between us more suffocating than any words could have been. There was a heaviness in the air, a tension that was new to us. We fell asleep that night, worlds apart, physically and emotionally. I couldn't shake the curiosity gnawing at me, even though I had a sinking feeling I wasn't going to like what I'd find out. Mason, wearing a grin so wide it almost seemed unnatural, turned to me with a look of pride in his eyes. It was a look I hadn't seen from him in ages, not since the days when things between us seemed simpler, before everything fell apart. Let me introduce you, he said with enthusiasm that practically made the air around him crackle. This is Diana, my new wife. We're on our honeymoon. And get this, she's the daughter of a very successful businessman. The name, Diana, hit me like a thunderclap. My heart skipped a beat, and a rush of memories flooded my mind, the pieces snapping together. Diana, I knew her. I remembered the phone call, the conversation from months ago that had left me unsettled. A tight knot formed in my stomach as I watched Mason bask in the glow of his new life, married to someone younger, more beautiful, and clearly more wealthy than me. Mason noticed my silence and shot me a look that was as smug as it was dismissive. You're here alone? He asked, his voice dripping with condescension. How pathetic. Diana, standing beside him, offered a cold, smug glance my way, as if she were savoring my discomfort. Hey, Mason, she piped up, her voice sharp and full of superiority. Is this your ex? She looks, well, a bit older. Can you hurry up with the check-in? Her tone made it clear she thought very little of me. I fought to keep my composure, pushing down the sting of her words. Mason casually draped an arm around Diana, his tone swelling with pride. Yeah, he said, his voice thick with self-satisfaction. I'm set for life now, marrying into money. You, still struggling in that pathetic little world of yours. His obnoxious laugh filled the lobby, the sound of it grating against my nerves like nails on a chalkboard. It shattered the rare peace I had been trying to hold on to. Yeah, Diana's father is Goldsmith, of Goldsmith Enterprises, he added, practically glowing with the thrill of his own success. The name hung in the air, and my mind raced to catch up. Goldsmith Enterprises, I knew that name, recognized it instantly, and as the realization hit, Mason's expression transformed into one of pure triumph. Impressive, right? He beamed. Her family's loaded. They even paid off our mortgage already. Thanks for making the divorce easy. Patricia, he added, his words dripping with sarcasm. I maintained a calm exterior, though the words stung. I know them, I replied, my voice cool and collected, despite the emotions swirling inside me. They're the ones with that big building downtown. I've been there. Mason blinked, taken aback by my response. You've been there? His tone shifted slightly, surprise flickering across his face. Well, her family owns one of the biggest companies in the country. So yeah, divorcing you was definitely the right choice. I didn't flinch. That building? It's part of our real estate portfolio, I said, my voice even, as if discussing the weather. Mason and Diana exchanged a look, confusion written all over their faces. What do you mean, our real estate? They both asked in unison, the question hanging in the air like a challenge. I nodded, keeping my tone steady. That building was purchased by my father for $500 million. He was actually complaining about one of his tenants the other day. The company that's renting it, Goldsmith Enterprises, hasn't paid their rent in months. The words hung in the air. I could see the wheels turning in Mason's head, but I wasn't done yet. My father's a real estate mogul with $5 billion in assets. So, yeah, your company's been renting that building without paying a dime. I'm sure that's going to come to a head soon. Diana laughed, but there was a nervous edge to it. That's impossible, she said, her voice faltering slightly. Our company is doing great. We're not behind on anything, but I could see the doubt creeping into her eyes. Even though the sight of Mason with his new wife stung more than I cared to admit, I wasn't about to let them off the hook. Diana's dismissive tone, Her refusal to believe what I was saying made it clear that either she was in denial, or she was deliberately lying. I reached into my bag and pulled out my phone. "I'll call my father," I said, dialing quickly. "Can you send me a photo of the rent reminder notice?" Moments later, my father's message pinged on the screen. The image of the notice was crystal clear: 4 months of unpaid rent from Goldsmith Enterprises. I held the phone up for both Mason and Diana to see, the silence that followed as thick and uncomfortable as the tension between us. There was no way they could ignore it now. "See," I said, my voice steady, almost too calm, "if your company doesn't pay soon, my father might be forced to take legal action. So, what's your plan?" Diana's composure cracked. "Come to think of it," she muttered, her voice less certain now, "my dad has been stressed lately. There've been slow sales, a lot of layoffs." The words came out like an afterthought, but the doubt was there. Mason, however, was quick to spiral into defensive rage. "You're just trying to ruin us, aren't you? Trying to get back at me because I remarried. You're still the same manipulative person you always were," he shouted, his voice a sharp accusation. The outburst was like a slap in the face. His anger, so familiar, hit me hard, dredging up old memories, his cruelty, the insults, the manipulation. But I wasn't the same person anymore. I was no longer the woman who cowered under his words. "What are you even saying, Mason?" I said, my voice cutting through his fury. "Do you really think I still care about you? How ridiculous. I've been over you for years. Honestly, I feel sorry for Diana, getting tangled up with someone like you." My voice was firm, unwavering, and I watched his face twist in disbelief. For the first time in years, I felt like I was truly free.